Hello, everybody. It's Romania Black. We are on episode 21 of My Hero Academia Season 5, Revival Party. I'm pretty excited because now we are in to My Villain Academia. If you're a manga reader, this is a really awesome section of the manga. And I can't stress this enough. You should definitely go back and reread the manga up until this point if you're not if you're an anime only. I don't think you'll be spoiled if you read up to chapters, because the way that this isn't really spoiling anything, but they've actually restructured the manga for this anime season, which I'm actually happy with in a lot of ways. In some ways I have conflict with, and I'll talk about that in the spoiler discussion, so I don't want to spoil you, but I don't think it's a spoiler at this point in the season to know that they have restructured some things from the manga. So if you want to go read the manga and catch up, just be aware of that the structure of the story changes a little bit, and I think that they've streamlined it to make this anime season a little bit more cohesive. The way Horikoshi writes, which I appreciate about Horikoshi, he doesn't really care about anime structures. He's not writing to adapt to anime. I mean, he is in a certain sense because Shonen Jump has certain timelines and they require cliffhangers, things like that, as far as editing goes. But I feel like for the most part, Horikoshi just writes his story how he wants to, and then they adapt it the way that they see fit. And I think the adaptation for the most part has been pretty good this season. So if you want to start season 5 and read through the manga, it starts at chapter 191. And then at the moment, we're on chapters 224 at this point in the series. So I think that you could read the manga and catch up to this point pretty easily. So there's that. But I'm really excited because some of the moments that I really like from this arc have yet to come. I have a feeling kind of where they might end on, so that's pretty exciting. And so yeah, we'll just see how it rolls out. But I'm really happy. Last episode, I love the logo change. I love that we're getting into the series. For the record, the manga way more gory than the anime, and I think that's true for most anime, which is funny because they censor the anime, but then when you go read the manga that like any kid can access way easier than an anime. A kid can go to a bookstore and pick up a manga and read it rather than having to tune and find the channel, right? But it's way more accessible, I think, a manga is than an anime, but yet the manga is way more graphic. So I don't know. I don't know how censorship works in Japan. I don't know. But in any case, I really, really have appreciated how they handled last episode. There's lots of things I'm looking forward to at these next couple episodes, and we'll just kind of see where it goes to. But I'm pretty excited. So yeah, let's get into this, shall we? As per usual, we'll watch the episode, and then I'll do a non-spoiler discussion, and then do a spoiler discussion after that. So let's dive into this, shall we? We are going to start episode 21 of My Hero Academia Revival Party here in 3, 2, 1, let's go. Oh, I really liked this episode. Mainly for the content. I will go ahead and say one criticism I have for the episode, and it's a very generic criticism, and it makes me just like a little like irked, I guess, more than anything. And y'all can comment down below on it, but maybe it's just me, but I feel like the animation quality in this episode was a little... I get frustrated by it because as somebody that's read the manga, I'd forgotten elements of the story that happened. So when it happened, I was like, oh yeah, because I don't really reread until after the episode. So when I went back and reread the manga chapters for this episode, I was like, oh yeah, that is what happened. And so I felt a little frustrated because the storyline in this episode, the story, the symbolism, the thematic reveals with Toga and Shigaraki and Twice are really, really important. And the whole thing with Registro is really important. And I really love that part of the story in this arc. And I just get frustrated because I feel like the animation quality in this episode just isn't quite reflective of how good it is, if that makes sense. For example, in parts of the episode, like going back and rewatching this, in parts of the episode, they show like people from the Meta Liberation Army coming at Shigaraki and the others, but it's all like just freeze frame, and it just shows like the freeze frame. It's not an actual animation of them coming towards them. It's just like shots and moving shots, which is fine, but it's frustrating because I feel like in previous seasons they've done the animation where it shows the characters actually moving And I think it would be more dynamic and intriguing, the fights would be, if those characters were moving along. Which I get that's a lot to animate, but I'm like, you're My Hero Academia. You have the resources, right? So that's a big nitpick on me, and that's just my personal preference, is that, especially watching other anime right now that are animating those fight scenes to a different extent, I feel like the animation was just a little underwhelming for how good the story is, and that's so frustrating because the story is so good in this episode. So I just wanted to get that out of the way and just say that that's my tiny little nitpick. But this episode, it's funny because I want to talk about spoilers, but then I don't want to talk about spoilers, so I'll keep my other stuff for the spoiler discussion on here. I love the idea of, it's very X-Men like, the idea of the Meta Liberation Army. I love this concept that this whole time in this series, we've talked about a hero society and a villain society, and we've brought up the idea of anti-heroes or vigilantes, which is the whole spin-off series for My Hero Academia, talking about vigilantes, kind of like Stain. But I love the idea of, yeah, there's a faction of quirk users that don't call their abilities quirks, they call them meta abilities, and that they believe that there shouldn't be this societal regulation of it. It shouldn't be that you have to have a hero license to use your powers. It should be you can just use them whenever you want to. And on the surface, it's like, yeah, that sounds great, that you'd have a society where everybody just uses their quirks whenever they want to. But it's funny because you can kind of see it both ways. You can see people being like, oh no, we need a hero society. There needs to be some regulation so people don't just go off the rails and use their abilities whenever they want to. But then there's another side of it that's like, but it's your ability, it's your body, you were gifted with this, why should you be regulated by society? So it's neither party is necessarily right or wrong. There's lots of shades of gray, and the Meta Liberation Army is just one faction that believes a certain way and is trying to promote that certain ideology. And it's very smart the way they do it, because they talked about Destro at the very beginning here, that Destro's solution was that it started out kind of as a, we'll get people together and have a peaceful protest about it, and it quickly devolved into riots and something where the government came in and just swept Destro out and imprisoned him and then just stopped the Meta Liberation Army. And it's kind of funny that it's gone from that to Redestro has learned from it, and he's like, okay, we're not going to make a public protest out of this. Instead, we're going to take my father's words and spread them and disseminate them to the public and slowly develop this ideology and cultivate it over time to where people don't feel like they're being forced to understand this rhetoric. It's just becoming part of the narrative, part of society. And it's just, the ideology is becoming just something natural, which is a very smart move. Very smart. And it's very effective because they have over 100,000 people that are not 100,000 people that believe in the ideology. I'm sure there's more, but 100,000 soldiers that are willing to fight for that ideology, which that's the scary part, is that they're all scattered about. Very Hail Hydra, very esque of that. I find it interesting that he committed suicide, that Destro did. I think that's an interesting note by Horikoshi, that he wasn't killed in prison, that he committed suicide. I think that's intriguing. I kind of wish the story would go into more detail with that. I don't remember if it does or not. But I love the idea that Destro didn't know he had a son, and that Redestro is carrying on his father's legacy. And I love that. I absolutely love it. And I like Redestro as a character. We'll talk in spoiler discussion about him more, because I'm not sure if they'll touch on this in later episodes, so I don't want to bring it up now. But I just like the idea of this group, and they're all different characters who clearly all have similar like-minded ideologies about the Meta Liberation Army, and their abilities kind of... And it makes sense, because their abilities, like Shizuki, for example, the reporter, her ability is to make anything into a bomb. That sounds like a villain ability. We talk about Shinso and abilities that seem like they're catered towards villains. Shizuki's, her whole ability is like, naturally you'd assume it was a villain power, right? Turning things into bombs. Like, how is that a helpful ability to be a hero? Obviously, you can make it helpful, but society's initial reaction would be, oh, she's a villain, right? It's kind of like the Shinso argument, what society instantly assumes about you on first impression. And so I can instantly see how Shizuki would want to use her ability whenever she wants to without the prejudice of someone telling her she's a hero or a villain. That all makes sense. I also love that, and we'll talk about this in the spoiler discussion, about Redestro and the mask. The mask coming up, it's the same as his dad. But like I talked about in the reaction, I like that Redestro doesn't look exactly like his father. It's good to keep that secret of who his identity actually is, but it's also convenient where he doesn't, it's also realistic. You sometimes look like your parents, but you don't look like carbon copies of your parents. So clearly the nose and the elven ears, like he clearly, and the receding hairline, very, very much, I'm assuming, from his mother's side of the family, which is interesting. But yeah, so this episode, we get a lot into the characters and kind of their backstories. I like that we're going into the backstories of these characters and kind of why they're in the League of Villains, what's shaped their ideologies, and how I think the big part of this series is, at least this arc of the series, is characters evolving. We had the whole first half of this season has been Class 1 and Class 1A and 1B and how they've evolved and changed over time. And now we're seeing it with the villains, because it makes sense. If our heroes, if their powers and quirks can evolve and change and develop, why can't the villains? Why can't the villains, right? So that makes sense. But I forgot how much I really, really, really like Toga's story in this. Toga is, on the surface, she doesn't seem like she seems kind of one note, right? And I've seen a lot of other reactors talk about Toga and be like, she's just creepy and weird and one note. And I'm like, no, she's actually one of the more complicated characters in this series, because her motivations and her ideologies are not simple. They're not black and white. There's a lot of gray area for her, and it's delving into like a psychological thing that I think is kind of relatable to true life. When we talk about, you talk about serial killers, you talk about people that commit atrocities, that a lot of times when they do interviews, the family and friends are like, oh, well, they just seemed like a really nice person. That's kind of the same thing with Toga. And it's on the surface, the reporter's kind of insulting her, being like, oh, I want to interview and know your story, and how did you go insane? And it's that line, how did you go insane? And Toga's like, I didn't go insane. This is how I've always been. Which is crazy. And yeah, you can argue that's not good, that she's always, but this is where it gets complicated. It's like Toga's concept of love and her motivations and her wanting to become what she loves, and how she becomes that she loves is by sucking their blood. So it's this act that is, I want to pause and just say that, for the record, Dobby stepping in to kind of protect Toga, it's very subtle, but it's a nice little touch. But the problem is that Toga's motivation, Toga's quirk, is something that society would instantly frown upon. The idea of sucking blood and consuming blood to become someone goes against a lot of societal appropriateness, right? Because people are like, oh, well, one, you don't suck people's blood, because that involves you probably need to hurt them to do so. So no. And two, ingesting blood to become someone else, no. So her quirk naturally just pits her against society. And it always has. And I like that Toga establishes that she kind of created a mask. She created a persona of the quiet good girl and tried to hide behind it for so long. And then in middle school, she loved someone and wanted to become them. And she ended up killing them to do it. And so it doesn't excuse her killing people at all, right? It doesn't excuse her action. But what I like the Horikoshi does is a lot of times a villain like Toga, if you could do this, I could see a different show just being like, she's crazy and just kills people for no reason and drinks their blood to become them. And isn't that weird? Like, I could see a show just pitting her as just a very simple, insane person. And that's it. And it's not the case. Toga just has a very complex psyche, and her whole motivation's grounding in her quirk and how it's part of her and how she just instinctually does things. It kind of relates to Shigaraki, and when he was talking about he's sick but he feels calm, like that's the same thing with Toga. Like that's how she connects with Shigaraki. And when she talked about, she's like, things that I hate, I want to destroy. I'm sure you feel the same way, Shigaraki. It's like, yeah, that's the connection. That's why she follows him, because they have the same ideology towards that. I mean, obviously, I don't know if Shigaraki loves anything. That's the sad part. I don't think Shigaraki loves anything, which is sad. And Toga loves many things. She loves Ochako. She loves Deku. And so, but in her own way, it's sad, because her way of loving something in her mind is to become them, and to become them means that they have to be hurt. which that whole process that's what the disturbing part is that she does understand what love is, but it's so different than what the societal expectations are that it's viewed as something disturbing or outlandish. But I find Toga's character fascinating, especially as the series goes on, and we'll talk about it in the spoiler corner. But I just love that the reporter tries to put her in this, she tries to frame her in this box, right? And she does the thing with her hands. She's like, I'm trying to frame you for this interview. And she tries to just niche her away into a box of, oh, the tragic misunderstood girl. Here's how you fit into this box of what I expect for a character. And Toga's like, no, it's not that simple. And I love the reveal, the metaphor and symbolism of the mask breaking apart. And you see Toga's real face and she's smiling. She's like, I'm smiling when I'm happy. And she's happy when she's around things that she loves. It's like, and the whole twist of her power developing and her being able to take on the abilities of people whose blood she consumes, that's going to make her pretty strong, right? That's a bit OP. Because what if she drinks Aizawa's blood? She could stop quirks. What if she drinks Shigaraki's blood? What if she drinks, if she cultivates that power and ability, that's going to be really dangerous, right? So I don't know if it would be like Monoma, where if she drank Deku's blood, it'd be like a blank. I wonder if she would draw a blank on certain abilities. Like if they're not, because Ochako's ability is it's not complex, right? I wonder if she drank the blood of someone whose ability was complicated, like Deku or Shigaraki's, if it would even work. Maybe it's like a blank effect. But yeah, just the ideology and the breaking down of why people do the things that they do, and using Toga as an example. And she's like, I just want to, and this ties back to Toga's whole motivations of being with the League of Villains. She's like, I just want to be free to do what I want and to live life as I see as normal. And so it's not that different from the Meta Liberation Army at all, but she's not, Toga's just not going on with the regime because she's loyal to them. She just wants to do things her way. I'll have some panels to show y'all in the spoiler discussion, but I love the panel shot. It looks like a Renaissance painting of her holding Toga as the others surround her. It's very Renaissance. And without spoiling anything, in the manga, Chizuki, she's like, oh, you'll become a martyr for the Liberation Army. Someone whose ideals are like ours, and you'll become a martyr and a symbol in your death. And she's like holding her like that. And it's like, I also establishing in this that the Meta Liberation Army is willing to go the distance, like making those actual people like sacrificing their bodies to become bombs. It's pretty scary, pretty freaky stuff, right? So the fact that the Meta Liberation Army is willing to go to those lengths, I think is very disturbing for the heroes, because, the heroes are playing things by the book and these guys are clearly not. So yeah, I love Toga's storyline. And then her just dropping all of them. I wondered, when we had Ochako showing her ability, in the back of my head the whole time, I was like, so could Ochako just drop someone to their death? The answer is yes. And Toga illustrates what that would be like. And that's pretty scary. Also, we finally get established Toga's age, that she's 17, that she dropped out of school after middle school. And so basically she's been roaming around on her own for the last couple of years. So that's good to know. But yeah, I love that metaphor of the mask. Like just pretending to be normal. Interesting. And that, what she loves. And the whole thing with the baby bird and just her discovering her quirk. And yeah, it's like Toga isn't heartless, but her concept of love and everything is very unique to her. And it just doesn't fit within societal constructs. And it is problematic in a lot of ways, but I like that this episode paints Toga as more than just a crazy girl. Because I think a lot of reactors, and myself included, but way back in like seasons 1 and season 2, we're like, oh, she's just a crazy person. She's just insane. And it's like, no, she's got a lot going on. It's just, she's complicated. And I like characters that are like that. I like when we get into, it's kind of like with Endeavor, when we get into these characters that on the surface kind of seem one note, and then when you actually start to dive into their characters, there's more to it. It's like, awesome, cool. I'm glad we get that. But yeah, feel bad for the reporter. She did. Her and her flunkies just bye-bye. And then it connects straight to Shigaraki, who's having the same kind of revelation with his quirk. And Spinner notices it too. He's like, oh shit, Shigaraki can just touch people and go through them, and even the people he didn't touch, as long as they were connected, they're all decaying as well. That's problematic. That's a problematic quirk development, because that makes Shigaraki very threatening, right? If he can just decay one person at a time, yeah, you can probably stop him. But if he can decay several people at a time, that's scary, right? And then, of course, Shigaraki starting to flash back and seeing bits and pieces of his past, which we'll get into in the spoiler discussion. But yeah, it's all, everything. Horikoshi's great at foreshadowing, just building everything up. And then, of course, we get Dabi versus Getten. I don't know if Getten's name's been said in this. It's not really a spoiler. You all find out next episode, probably. But Getten is the ice user, the ice climber against Dabi. So there's that. Fun times. I'm excited to get into that battle as well. And then we have old Twice. Twice has my heart. He is, if the League of Villains is an organization with body parts, Twice is the heart. Twice is the heart of the League of Villains, because he is so compassionate. And like I said in the last reaction, his storyline in season 3 was one of my favorites. And I just love that Twice is so concerned over Girin in this episode, who is the damsel in distress. So concerned over Girin, but also concerned over Toga. And I know some people ship Twice and Toga. It's hard, because Twice is clearly like in his late 20s, and Toga's 17, so that's not outlandish, but I always saw Twice and Toga more as like a platonic best friend, big brother younger sister relationship, which they established in this episode that Toga's the eldest, so she has siblings. I would be curious if Horikoshi ever gives us more on Toga's backstory, if we get info on those siblings. So I'd wonder if they have similar quirks, or if they're quirkless. That could be interesting to know. But it says she's the oldest. But yeah, Twice is just, his love for his found family in the League of Villains is so heartwarming. It's like, Twice, my dude. It's so sweet. I'm like, oh buddy. And then him just finding her and trying, and I love that he goes back and forth. The voices in his head, the versions of him go back and forth. They're like, help her. No, don't help her. She gave you that handkerchief. No, don't use it. She's going to die. And like, and him trying, like, it's so tense and anxious and gives you such anxiety to see him like struggle and try to figure out what to do. And then of course we have Skeptic coming in at the end to try to use his power to make the puppets that look like Twice to go at him. Kind of like using Twice's own ability against him. Which Skeptic is an interesting character. I find it fascinating with Skeptic that he seems like, when we first are introduced to Skeptic, he has the laptop and I always thought when we first got introduced to him in the manga that he would be like an intel collector. Like his whole ability would be related to like IT or technology or hacking or something like that, which it kind of is. But it's more turning things into puppets, which is, it connects back to that, but he's always seen with his laptop, and he's kind of like the IT guy for the Meta Liberation Army, which I like it, because it's Horikoshi basically saying like, oh, you expected this character to have this quirk based on what you saw, but here's the actual quirk that they have. And it's like, that's subverting what you expect. And I appreciate Horikoshi for doing that. That face that Twice makes where he's like that face in the mask. I love that Horikoshi is able to make Twice so expressive despite the fact that he's wearing a mask and his face is hidden throughout most of this. I love it. Twice is one of my favorites, and his eyes, and he very much is designed after Deadpool. Like his character design is very much based off of Deadpool, and the tears and everything. Sad Man's Parade is next episode, and I'm pretty excited. So this episode was really good. Just really good. It's content-wise, it's one of my favorites of the season. Absolutely. Probably in the top 2 so far. I love this episode. I am a little disappointed with the animation, but it's fine. You know what? It's okay. I'm hoping that, like in season 4, they're just saving some of their budget for like the bigger stuff to come, but that's all I'll say about that. So I do want to talk about spoilers. So if you're not sticking around for Spoiler Corner, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe and take care. Let me know what you thought about the reaction down below, and I hope y'all have a wonderful week. I'll talk to y'all again soon. I love this episode. I love it so much. There's only one part that I'm kind of like, the animation thing, yeah, that bugs me a lot, especially because I'm going to show y'all some panels from the manga, and the manga's really great. This pretty much beat for beat, again, I appreciate at this point that the anime is staying strictly to the manga, and it's not cutting anything out. I want to talk about one thing that's been cut out, I think, from the storyline entirely, which I'm kind of sad about. Like, I talked last episode about the creature rejection clan and how sad that was left out. There's one part of Redestro's backstory that I'm kind of sad about, but it's okay. But yeah, these chapters are chapters 224 to 228. So 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. 5 chapters, 5 whole chapters in this episode. Granted, and you guys will kind of see here in a minute, granted, a lot of what Horikoshi drew in those chapters were big wide shots, like double spreads with lots of like big, beautiful imagery. And so I can see how they went through 5 chapters in this episode, because he used a lot of page space for those beautiful shots. So not a lot of crazy exposition, except on the part of the reporter trying to delve into Toga, which again, I like Toga's character a lot. She's not one of my favorites, but I really like her character because she's interesting, and she makes the story complicated and subjective, and I like that because I think Toga is a polarizing character. People are either on board with her and her character, or they're like, it's still wrong. And I'm kind of in the middle. There's parts of Toga's character I really like. I find the concept of her loving something, and by loving she has to harm them, I find that interesting. Her methods, I'm like, But if you've read the manga, then you know that her and Ochako are definitely tied together. And chapter 324 is coming out tomorrow. And I'm really curious because I think that Ochako, there's a moment in chapter 324, which comes out tomorrow officially. There's a moment where Ochako's giving this big speech, and she pauses for a second thinking of Toga. And so I feel like Horikoshi is setting up Ochako and Toga to have this conversation about life and love and saving people. And Ochako's big thing is about saving people, saving the heroes. And so I like that Horikoshi's weaving in the idea of, okay, well, where do the villains go into this scenario? Because Ochako's like, yeah, heroes save civilians, but who saves the heroes? And Ochako's like, well, heroes need to save heroes, and civilians need to save them in a certain regard. But where do villains fall into that? Because like Twice established way back in season 3, Twice saying heroes only help the good guys. So how do you help people like Toga that are viewed as a bad person, but maybe aren't necessarily a bad person? So it's creating a very interesting dialogue, and I feel like Ochako will have an answer to that from Horikoshi at some point by the end of the series. But I love it. I love the animation. I'll show you guys this panel right here of the real face of Toga, the real smile with the canines and everything, and the mask breaking. It's really, really good. And like I said, that picture, that painting where she looks like a Renaissance painting. As a martyr, your tale will be a modern day parable for the ages. Of all of them, it looks so like just a Renaissance painting of her just like holding Toga's broken body in her arms right before she uses Ochako's ability. It's so good. And speaking of which, it's pretty gory in the manga. I like the anime showed the blood coming up, but in the manga you just see the bodies hitting the ground. Let the bodies hit the floor. And that parallel of her, I like that it's just like a contrast. On the one hand that has Toga's bloody face, the hand is clean, and on the hand of Ochako's clean face, the hand is bloody. So it's like Toga's using Ochako's power, this pure innocent person's power, to kill all these people. It's like, ooh, the contrast is just awesome. So the one part about this episode that I'm kind of sad about is we finally get Redestro's backstory to an extent. The idea that Destro didn't know he had a child, and Redestro grew up to reorganize the Meta Liberation Army in his father's honor. Like, we get that, and that's great. I'm glad that they did it. There's one aspect from way back in chapter 218, like way back at the start of the season, that they left out, and so I want to show it up here. But when Redestro was first introduced, it was right before the Endeavor mini arc. It was right before it was right around the time that we saw Bakugo and Shoto getting their license and stopping that one guy with their ice that stole all the purses. This happens at the same time in the anime as that. And it's a commercial, and it shows Redestro, like, going around town and being like, oh, how do we help these people? And he owns Detnerat now. He gains control of Detnerat, which is a hero supply goods chain that makes support items for heroes and support items for civilians to use. And it shows Redestro being this, beacon of positivity for humanity, and everything's gonna be all right with Detnerat. And then we see him talking to the CEO, and the CEO is like, well, I don't really know if we need to go as far as you want us to. And Redestro, like, introduces the Meta Liberation book to him, and he's like, I don't really think that we need to use this book in our rhetoric. I don't think it's good for the company. And then I love this panel here of Redestro like grabbing his head, because spoilers, Redestro's whole quirk is that the more stressed he gets, the more powerful he gets. So he takes his stress and transforms it into power. And I love that he's grabbing his head like, I'm so stressed. And then he takes that power to the current CEO of Detnerat. And then you see here, he gets the stuff coming out, like the stuff across. It looks like a mask, but it's actually like his quirk manifesting. And then he just snaps the neck of the CEO and takes over Detnerat. I wish they'd shown that in the episode, and maybe they will, but I don't think they will, because it ties instantly after this scene. It ties instantly into when we see him in this episode coming at Yatsubashi's child, coming there and taking over and meeting them and doing the Liberation Army pose. Like, it just ties right into it. So I don't think we're going to get it, which is sad, because one, it's a badass scene where he kills the CEO. Is it necessary for the plot? No, and I think that's why they cut it. But I would argue that it kind of is necessary in a way, because later on, when we get down the road into the war arc, the whole thing of civilians using support items to kind of take charge and defend themselves is a plot point that I think is brought up later that would be supported more and explained more with this thread about Detnerat offering all these support items. And there's a theory, we talk about the traitor of UA. There's a theory, which I'm kind of on board with, that Uraka, her, and Bakugo's uniforms both have like the little buttons on them. They both have two little buttons that looks like a stylistic thing. But a lot of people theorize that that's Detnerat, since they use support items in their outfits, in their uniforms, in their hero costumes. They have support items that they use. A lot of people's theories are that the support items are created by Detnerat, and that's where, and the two little buttons signify that they're being monitored, and that's how Detnerat gets all this info, is that they've been gathering info through the support items that they've given to the people at UA. And that's the real traitor. It's not been confirmed, but I like that theory a lot. The whole thing with Toga, I pretty much talked about her and Uraka. With Shigaraki, they're slowly... I love the meta joke in this episode where Shigaraki's like, just tell me the backstory already. Why are you just previewing it? I'm really curious. This episode gave me a little hope, because this episode was pretty gory. It gave me a little hope that maybe they won't be as gory as the manga with Shigaraki's backstory. They can't be. It's terrifying. Shigaraki's whole backstory with the corgi. I have corgis, and so I'm like, nope. But I don't doubt that they're going to be that graphic with it. But we do get to see Nana Shimura. We do get to see the little thing with Nana and the picture that he has of Nana. And it's of Nana and Shigaraki's father. And I'm still on the bandwagon. I still believe wholeheartedly that Gran Torino is Shigaraki's grandfather. And when you see the father of Tenko, he has the same hair as Gran Torino. It's just black. I'm just saying. I'm just putting my crackpot theory out there that Gran Torino's his actual grandfather, and that him and Nana had a thing. They're like one of my biggest pairings in this series. I'm just saying. And then we got the little glimpse of his sister, of Hannah, his sister. It's just... So the thing with Dabi and Getten, I did want to comment that I remember when this chapter of the manga first came out, there were so many theories about who Getten was, or who Geishin Getten. I always say Getten, it's probably something different. There were so many theories about who Getten was. And a lot of people were like, oh, it's Fuyumi. It's Fuyumi or Natsu with powers. And I was like, Or another big theory was that it was actually Toya Todoroki, that Toya Todoroki was not Dabi, that it was actually Toya and was taken away to cultivate their ice powers. And I was like, that's a pretty cool theory, but I was like, nah, it's Dabi. And so I love that once it kind of ruins it for the anime-only people to theorize, because once you hear the voice and it's clearly a deep, soft voice, it's like, oh, well, it's a different person entirely. But I love in the manga, everybody was theorizing and trying to figure out who it was. And who was it a secret Todoroki? Was it a fifth Todoroki? It's like, oh, it was great. It was a great time, because anytime you have an ice user, they have to be a Todoroki. But what I love about this fight, in hindsight, if you've read the manga, is knowing that Dabi is Toya, and knowing that Dabi was born with his mother's constitution, that Dabi has a body that's suited for handling ice users. Like, Dabi has a fire quirk, but his body is suitable for ice to fight against ice powers. So that's why he's so perfect to fight Getten, because he's like, oh, you can throw all the ice you want at me. My body can take it. My body is ready. So it's like, yeah, it's a great matchup, even if Dabi doesn't quite realize it, and Getten certainly doesn't realize it. It's a good matchup. And I love the ice climber design that Horikoshi gives them. Everybody was debating what Getten would look like under the hood, and of course we'll find it later. Getten's beautiful soft voice matches their beautiful appearance. It has a very Inosuke vibe from Demon Slayer, because Inosuke hides behind the boar's head and Getten hides behind the big parka, and then when you pull the boar's head off, you pull the hood back, it's like this beautiful character. It's like, oh, okay. All right. So my hope is that they've saved some of the budget for Shigaraki decaying everything, and that final fight between Redestro and Shigaraki. I hope that's what they've saved the budget for. They're like, we're saving up to have a big epic showdown at the end of this, so don't worry. Which this episode, again, was fine. I'm being super nitpicky, but I do love, again, Twice's reaction, Twice's facial expressions, and then, of course, y'all, Sad Man's Parade is next episode. From the preview, it looks like the animation's going to be kind of wonky, but you know what? I still loved this episode for the content of it, so I'm fine with that. That's okay. Sad Man's Parade is so... I feel like when they say Toga and Twice are opposites, they really are. They have opposite motivations, opposite kind of... The way they handle the concepts of love and destruction and life is all very different, but I love that they're friends. I love that their friendship is like... And again, seeing all this stuff with Twice, it hurts, because we're establishing in this arc just how compassionate and kind Twice really is. He just got lumped up with the League of Villains. He's made bad choices. I mean, obviously, him being kind and compassionate doesn't excuse him murdering people. Not at all. But it's sad because he's had to resort to that. It's like, you wonder, like back from season 3, if Twice had been given proper support and the proper resources to handle his quirk and the oddities that came with that quirk, like psychologically, if he could have been helped and could have turned out better, because he's not an evil person. He's not a malicious person. Twice isn't, but it's just what he's become. And so that's kind of the sad thing, is that, you know, when we talk about, you know, heroes only saving the good people, it's like if somebody had helped Twice out when he needed it years ago, if somebody had reached out to Shigaraki before All for One, all of this could have been avoided. And people didn't reach out to help them. And so this is what's happened. And it's such a good commentary on the importance of helping people that are like Twice and Shigaraki and Toga, and that you don't just abandon people or toss them aside because they don't meet a societal expectation. Oftentimes those people need more help than the people in society, so in normal society. So it's a really interesting commentary by Horikoshi, and I think it's going to become more pertinent as the story goes on and we get into the war arc, just how serious it is to pay attention to these people and that those resources are. So I'll end my rambling, but I just thought this was a really, really, really good episode. Oh my gosh. I'm really excited for the rest of the season, honestly. I think based on what we've seen, because we've already touched base on the Endeavor Agency, we've already touched base on Shirakumo, how I originally thought at the beginning of this season, I was like, oh, well, they'll end the season with Redestro giving his army to Shigaraki. that's how they end the season. And then as it went on, I was like, well, maybe they'll show us more of this, more of that. I think we're back to where it started. We ended up getting the Endeavor arc and Shirakumo in this season, which is insane. But I think it's going to end with Shigaraki getting Redestro's army. I think that next episode will be Sad Man's Parade. And then episodes 23, 24, and 25. 23 will probably delve into... 23 and 24 will probably delve into Shigaraki's backstory. And then 25 will be him versus Redestro. And that whole thing. I'm pretty excited. I'm excited. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below, what you all thought of this episode. It's going to be fun, and I can't wait. So I hope you all enjoyed this reaction. In the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll talk to you all again real soon with more My Hero Academia. Bye.